Hello, everyone. I'm Drum Major Kevin Conquest, and welcome to Podband Pipecast, the premier pipe band podcast.
Nice. That was a good
Two
one.
for two, yeah.
Doing well.
Yeah. So welcome back, everyone. We, as you heard, we have Kevin Conquest still with us. And like we said, he is just a wealth of knowledge on all kinds of things. And right now we're going to talk to him about marching specifically. Because as he is a drum major and has done very many drum major things, he knows a lot about marching. So most musicians in a pipe band will be familiar with the typical formation that we see, which is, pipes in front, and then you got your bass drummer, and then your tenor drummers and your snare drummers in the back. Do you know where this came from? Why do we do it like that? It's just one of those things, like, you just do it. That's how it's done. That's just what we do.
There really is an element in pipe band of not questioning the tradition. It's just what we've done, and that's what our grandfathers did, and our grandfathers before that, and back in the ages of the dinosaurs and cavemen, that's what they did as well. But in regard to having the pipes and drums together and the pipers in front, I actually don't know for sure where that came from. My guess is that there were two facets to that. One would be that sound-wise, I think it would make sense to have the pipers in front. While the pipes can be very loud, they're the melody of the band. And to have the percussion in front of that would be counterintuitive to the sound, I would say. But knowing the traditional aspects of where all this comes from, I have to wonder if the pipers were in front originally because pipers were paid and treated like officers in the early days of the Highland regiments. So I have to wonder if there's some origin in that. Now I'm going to have to go home and do a Google search on that. I should have done my homework before coming on this show. Oh yeah, good luck. Have you done it already?
Well, there's just very little pipe band history on the internet.
Okay, fair enough.
Yes.
It's hard to look anything up. I think it could also tie back into like classical music and stuff. You always see the main instruments in the percussion section is in the back. I don't know why, but
everyone hates drummers.
You have to be right on that. And even look at brass bands today. You'll see that the brass is in the front. Usually trombones being in the front rank. I think that has something to do with the fact that their arms are coming out for getting sixth position on the trombone. But having their arm come out and then the drums in the center with the woodwinds in the back. I think there's definitely an ensemble aspect to that. So you must be right. Yeah.
Is there a way to do this formation wrong? Is there things that you should do that people don't think about?
Ways that this could all be done wrong. Sloppy for one. Everything is, I don't want to say strict, but everything has a purpose, especially with the drill movements. If you watch British Army drill, everything that's done has a timing to it. There's a purpose to it. There's no single part of a drill movement or part of marching that is unnecessary. It's all a means to an end. So when you look at a formation of a pipe band, typically everything's 2x2, 2 paces between files, which are the front to back, and 2 paces between ranks, which are the horizontal aspect. So, if you're lining up 4 across, it's going to be 2 down the line, and then and doing it that way. So ways to do it right versus doing it wrong. I don't want to say that there's necessarily a wrong way to do it, because I think we've seen things done innovatively with marching. And if you want to go 5 across, 6 across, a lot of bands, and especially in grade 1, you'll see them going 9 and 10 across at times because they have a huge frontage. And in competition, having a large frontage is good for the sound, for the pipes coming into the circle. But I would say things that would be not so nice to do, not having proper spacing between files going front to back. And the reason I say that is when it comes time to do that counter march, if you're too crunched together, there's no chance it's going to go well. Having that 2 pace distance between each file allows, when that turn happens, it allows us to go through the interval between files without clanging drones, without clanging drum shells. Nothing sounds worse. Well, nothing looks worse than having drone cords hooked together and watching the traffic jam collision. And nothing sounds worse than having a bass drummer topple over or drum shells clanking against each other. So those things happen. That's an interesting question in terms of right versus wrong. And again, I could spend all weekend talking to you about various things. So I was thinking about this particular question as I was coming over here to do the show. Marching in pipe bands is a lot like driving on a freeway. And the reason I say that, you may be a good driver or you may not be a good driver, but when you get behind the wheel of that car, you're the expert and everybody else is a bad driver, right?
Mhm.
When it comes to marching in a pipe band, I think it's because everybody wants to do it well, and nobody in our band especially wants to do it badly. But they may not have the expertise, but they'll be the first one to tell you you're off center or you're not, guiding. So I think it's a case of, I'm looking for the right words for this. It's a case of wanting to do it well, but may not know the exact things to say or do to make it proper. And also, pipe band is a very different type of marching. Again, we've got a lot of folks that come from high school marching bands, college marching bands, DCI, military, and U.S. military drill and British military drill are two different things. Some things may look the same, but it's not even close. So a lot of folks come into pipe band with previous knowledge that is applicable, but is not exactly the way that a pipe band does it. Sometimes it may be too rigid. If you were on the Marine Corps silent drill team, you're not going to be impressed with a civilian pipe band's marching. But if you've never done anything like it before, you'll be very impressed with it. So it's finding that right middle ground, I guess is the right way of saying it.
Cool. What are other procedures for marching and drill that bands should be doing in order to look extra sharp? Like formations and standing and everything.
The best way to make a pipe band look sharp is to keep it simple, but also keep it well rehearsed. Don't spring things on your band that you've never done before 5 minutes before we go on. Learn the basics. The basic formation, having the pipes in front with the bass and the tenors as the next rank or couple ranks, and then having the snares in the back. We do that in our practices. We spend a lot of time before our what we would typically call our show season. November, we have a gig every weekend in November.
Mm-hmm.
We spend that time doing the basic drill as a formation. We get used to what that sounds like. We get used to what that looks like. And we go back and forth. We do counter marches. We practice doing the wheels. Once you've got that as your basic visual repertoire for a performance, then start moving into different things. It doesn't really matter how many you have across. I think the basics will always work as long as everybody in your band has done this before, they'll understand it. But there are other things that we can do. We've tried using them before. We use the horseshoe a lot when we perform, because that allows us to face our audience versus using a circle, where in competition that's expected, but in a show it's rude to put your back to the audience. I can't think of many people that I've heard of, back in the 60s and the heydays of rock and roll music. Yeah, I went to go see the Beatles live in concert and they faced their backs to me the entire time. Obviously a concert formation is very nice to put the sound and the look going towards the audience, but there are other things that we can do. Different types of counter marches. We've used a counter march where the outside edges go across the front of the band and kind of do almost like a rainbow shape. We call it a crown counter march because it looks like a crown, but it goes around the inside of the band and the inside goes around each other, and we do it that way. That's kind of neat because it's different for the crowd, but it puts the pipe major back on the proper side of the band. Again, speaking about traditions, the pipe major being on the right-hand side of the band, that goes back to the days of medieval troops with how the sword and shield would be held. So your senior person would be put on the right because they would have the most protection. That is a holdover to this day of a tradition that was used. So that's why the pipe major is on that side. Other types of turns that can be done. There are square turns versus the wheel where it looks like a gate turning across. A square turn would be more typical of what a U.S. military band does, where each file on each successive left foot makes their turn. And then, like mark time, turn, mark time, turn, mark time, turn, and then they'll turn on each other. There's other types of things we can do. There's like a fleur-de-lis formation where if you're 5 across, the center file keeps going forward. The inside 2 files go out 45 degrees, and then the outside 2 files make a hard turn 90 degrees. And it looks like a fleur-de-lis going outward, and then the bass drum gives a double tap, and then everybody turns back around and comes back in. So it's a counter march with that spread out. That looks very nice. There's all kinds of formations and things that I could take all day talking about this.
I want to try that one time.
They sound
cool.
nice in theory, but I'm just imagining our band practicing that.
Patience.
Yes.
Patience, my young Jedi Padawan.
Where do I go? Just follow the person in front of you.
And you know what? A lot of that is follow the leader. I think we've always hammered on it when the band's working on wheels, for example, wheels being one of the I don't want to say worst, but just sketchiest things that we can ever see in mass bands. Because that becomes a case of wanting to get through it quicker than what should normally happen. So the concept behind a wheel is as that front rank turns around, everybody in the files and ranks behind them just does the exact same thing as the person in front of them. So the inside should just go ahead and crunch up a tiny bit, lose their dressing front to back, and dress up close to the person behind them and just wait their turn and go around, and they successfully do that. The outside's going to have to step out, but if everybody just does exactly what the person in front of them did, it works out. If you're patient, it works out. But what we typically see everywhere in mass bands, in large pipe band performances, the drummers always fishtail and go around, because in theory they think it's quicker, to go right to go left. But if we just let it work its course, it actually looks great from the outside.
Just do what you're supposed to do.
Exactly right.
Follow the person in front of you. So do you have any tips for bands that want to start practicing marching? What are, just do it? Just line people up and just do it? Or what do you think is most helpful?
Yes, I got plenty of tips that can help with that. So find someone who understands drill. And they don't have to be a drill sergeant. They don't have to have that level of knowledge, but find someone who did military marching or marching band, because the absolute basic thing that you can do to get a band looking sharp on the march is make sure, obviously, that they're on step. And if a band is brand new or they've never really done any marching before, there's nothing wrong with putting all the instruments away and just getting together to learn how a band should look in formation, and just get them walking in pace to bass drum. Have the bass drummer just hit the left foot and get everybody on the left foot and get them used to doing that. Teach them how to align properly. So this is stuff that doesn't even really get talked about in our band sometimes. You're kind of reminding me that we need to get back to basics on this. It's a lot. It sounds easy to say, just dress to your right. Well, what does that mean? How do I know that I'm dressing to the right? Well, if the right-hand side of the band, so for example, here's some trivia. A lot of people don't know when they first join a pipe band, they hear this command, by the right, quick march. Does that mean by the right foot? Does that mean by the right that we have to march? What does that mean? It's a military command. By the right is telling you where the dressing should be taken from. So in pipe bands, by the right, quick march means you're going to guide off the right-hand side of the band. By the center is typically used, you hear that more used by drum majors, but why that's used is in the British military, 4 across or shorter, the dressing is usually to the senior side, right or left. Larger than 5 across, it has to do with peripheral vision, how far across the human eye can see naturally without having to do this. So by the center is used in large formations because it's a lot easier to look out of the corner of your eye into the middle of a shorter run than it is to look 14 across by the right. That's not going to happen. You won't keep the dressing. And by the left could be used. It's rare, but that would be used in a case where if you started a performance with the pipe major on the right-hand side, you've given by the right quick march, and you've done a counter march during the performance, you've stopped before you've realigned going what we call the proper way, or the way you started, the advanced position versus the retired position. Mm-hmm. You could say, technically by the left quick march to put that dressing back onto where you want it to be. But get them learning how to do that. And when I say, dress to the right, what does that mean? Well, you should be able to look out of the corner of your eye, and your shoulders should be just about aligned, so that if each person is doing that, and let's say Adele is in the pipe major position, my shoulders are aligned and your shoulders are aligned with me, you can look out of the corner of your eye. And if all you see is me, then you're technically in proper dressing with the senior person on the rank. If you see that she's ahead, that means that I'm back and I need to come forward. And so those are things that you can do. Again, dressing side to side, but also front to rear. You should be lined up with the person in front of you that you only see. If you're the third or fourth person back in the band, you should only see the person in front of you. You might see heads or shoulders based on heights of different people, but that's perfectly aligned. So those are some easy things that bands can learn how to do without even playing. Just get together and learn how it works out. learn to take a proper step size. So step size can be a really big deal in pipe bands, and that can actually hurt the musical performance. If a band is marching and they're taking a step size that's just humongous, it detracts from the music because you start losing your focus on what you're playing. Also with pipers have drones that they're balancing on their shoulder. If you're taking huge steps, or you're not walking, I shouldn't say walking, if you're not marching properly, those drones are going to start bouncing around. That can really detract from the music. Same thing with taking too short a step. If you're taking these little baby steps along the way, it can make you feel nervous, because why is this taking so long to get from point A to point B, right? So a typical step size by military tradition would be 30 inches. Pipe bands generally take something a little shorter. A great way to do this for a band, a great tip for a band that wants to make their marching better, take a poll of the average heights of the band. Find the person that's just about the middle height of the band, most average. Ask them what their natural step size is and watch them take it. Pick that as your step size for the band. The people who are shorter only have to step out a tiny bit. The people who are taller only have to step back, shorten their step a tiny bit, and that makes things really smooth. Again, I can go on. I don't want to bore everybody. I can go on. But even things like how they're taking the step, pipe bands are not high school marching bands. High school marching bands have a bicycle step where they roll that foot. It's awesome for what they do because it keeps the horns from bouncing and it keeps a very steady sound, but we don't do that. We use a very typical military style step, but you'll often see folks where, based on just how they walk naturally, you'll see folks where the ideal is to land somewhat on the front of the heel, on the heel and in towards the middle of their shoe. So you're just taking a normal step, but you'll see folks that kind of goose step it a little bit by their natural walk. You'll see folks that land toe first. And again, we're playing instruments when we do that, especially pipers. You got to keep that drone steady. You got to keep that chanter steady, and you can hear the sound. If you jostle an instrument while it's being played, audibly, we'll hear that. You'll hear that sound. Drummers, same thing. If you're carrying a bass drum, your whole weight, your whole center of balance, your center of gravity is changed. If you walk funky and you play the drum, it'll absolutely come out in your playing. It'll absolutely come out in how you perform. So marking time, that's a big one that, again, I don't want to use the terms right or wrong, but in terms of level of effort, there's really only two places you can mark time, two ways you can mark time that feel right. It's either a very short marking time step or all the way up. The human leg knows 90 degrees because when we sit in a chair, it's 90 degrees. Or we know about a 45-degree angle. But if you see bands that just kind of waddle into place, that doesn't really look impressive. And I actually argue that having to just kind of move your feet a little bit is more difficult than just doing it. So we try to bend our knees and mark time with a 45-degree angle. It's not that hard. Any higher, as a piper, you risk banging your chanter with your knee. Drums, snares, playing on harnesses, we can't obviously do that. So that's another one that's good. But yeah, plenty of marching advice. Contact me offline if you need help.
We don't have the time in the day.
Sorry, folks.
No, that's great. This is great.
So before we move on to talk a little bit about the tattoo, I would like to hear about this stick that you brought.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So tools of the trade. This is called a pace stick. And speaking of that 30-inch pace, this was something that was invented for artillery. And it was used very much like a protractor or a compass to make sure that guns were spread out, the cannons were spread out to the right number of paces between each firing position. So this is used very much like a protractor, and it's got different settings with different numbers, and you can see that I'm going to put the pin in the 30-inch spot.
So for people that can't see this, first of all, pay $5 for Patreon, and you can
pay your $5.
You can see what we're doing here. But it's a giant protractor. It's literally a 3-foot long protractor.
I'm coming in at a weird angle on this. There we go. Got it. Couldn't see what I was doing. Still can't. Be a drum major. Don't know what you're doing. But this is used as a drill wonky, somebody who really likes drill. This was something that I absolutely had to have in my collection. And this can be used to measure out the paces in a formation. So you can see that 30-inch space between that's a step size. it looks like a lot, but when you're walking, it's really not. But you'll watch folks, you can see British sergeant majors who march along and turn this as they march to get the number of paces. And it's got different settings for different numbers of drills. So 33 inches would be stepping out, 27 inches would be stepping short, 12 inches would be the space between your feet when you're standing at ease. But this can be used for all of that. And I use it when I'm planning out larger mass bands. I will get out with the pace stick and I'll walk across to make sure that we have the proper space. For the footage, I'll also put discs on the ground for the front rank to know where they land when they march. The story behind this is very much a British military accessory. And again, it's appointment of a drill sergeant or sergeant major. These are rare to get. My family tried to get it for me for Christmas one year. And they called to England where these are manufactured, and they got some runaround because it was already December, and it was a little late in the game. They're measured for the height of the person who uses it, and they said, "Well, let's take down your information, and we'll maybe we can do it for you." And I had known these folks because I bought maces from them for years. So when my family said, "Okay, it's going to be for Kevin," they stopped. They said, "Well, why didn't you say so in the first place? Of course we'll do it." But I do use this. I don't really use it at the band hall. I know you folks haven't seen it before. But on a games field, the day before a contest, when I'm planning out the mass pipes and drums, this is absolutely in my kit.
Just another thing that a drum major does to prep for mass bands.
To make sure that we're not going to crash and put 10 pounds of potatoes into a 5-pound sack. So,
if you didn't watch the last episode where Kevin talked about being a drum major at a mass band, go back and watch it. I don't know why you're here if you haven't watched it.
This is not like Star Wars. You have to watch them in order.
Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, so speaking of, we've been teasing this for the past 2 episodes. So we know that you just got back. Well, I say just got back. Last summer, you were in Edinburgh for the Edinburgh Tattoo and actually were a drum major in the tattoo. What was that like?
Well, first, what is a tattoo? Why is it called that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, all right, yeah. These are great questions. Okay, so a tattoo is a military pageant, for what it's worth. It's a visual and musical pageant. The origin of tattoo comes from probably several centuries ago, I would say. It was a Dutch phrase, dood en tap toe, which was turn off the taps. And that was typically heard at the end of the night when they wanted the soldiers to go back to barracks and get the heck out of our pubs. So dood en tap toe became synonymous with a retreat, an evening retreat. And that became tattoo. Dood en tap toe, tattoo. And now it's a retreat ceremony done at sunset. Music, uniforms, military rifles, color guards, everything. And the Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo is really the pinnacle thing for that. I would call it ceremonial music. It's the flagship of the entire world. And that's been going on for now 70 years. And again, it started as a very simple evening retreat ceremony as part of the Edinburgh Festival of the Arts, International Festival of the Arts, and now it's its own beast. For pipe bands, it's very rare outside of the British military to have an opportunity to march in it. For drum majors, outside of the British military, it's extremely rare. And so for me to be able to do this was a dream come true. A program called Piper's Trail, which allowed musicians from all around the pipe band world to audition and be part of this spectacular, opened up for, I think they only started doing this, I think 2014 was when I think they started doing the tattoo. But again, these opportunities were rare. And when I first heard about it, I didn't think that I would be able to get that time off from work because it is a month of shows. And it's every night, except for Sundays, and 2 shows on Saturdays. There's an early evening matinee, and then there's the evening show as well. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of time off. It's a lot of time away from home. I just happen to be lucky in my career that it's something that I can take with me. I can take my computer and my internet connection wherever I go, that it was time to apply. And I went ahead and applied. I applied twice. The first time I applied, I did not get selected, and that's okay. Things happen. I can imagine that there were tons of drum majors that audition, and I've seen some very good ones have that opportunity. So I was delighted to find out that I got picked this year. And what that's like, we had to get together at the end of July. So when we went on our band's trip to Scotland in June, I was only home for 2.5 weeks before I went back across. I should have just stayed over, but I had 2 other Highland games that I had to do work at before I went over. But we arrived in late July, got to Edinburgh, and in the case of Piper's Trail and the other non-military bands that were there, we all stayed at the university, and that was an awesome experience. It's, imagine staying at a hotel with all your friends. Like when we go on band trips, imagine having everybody there. That's what it was like for a month. It was great to meet these people from Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Germany, France, all over. It was a week of practices leading up to it. So during the day, we'd get up first thing in the morning and we'd go over to one of the barracks and we'd practice on the square there. And using the pace stick, using cones, using discs, they had laid out the same exact dimensions as the Esplanade of Edinburgh Castle. And we learned our formations and we learned how we were going to move. And again, speaking about some of the things that we can do differently other than just like standard counter marches and wheels. That's where we did a lot of different things. We formed a gigantic plaid brooch. The plaid brooch is, for those who may not know, is the ornament that holds the plaid together on a full dress uniform. When you see a drum major or a piper with the long tartan wrapped around their chest and over their shoulder like a cape, a brooch is a piece of jewelry, an ornament that is pinned through and holds it all together. So for our big static formation for the tattoo for the mass pipes and drums, we came out, we'd march out, we'd mark time while the drum corps caught up and came out. Because again, we're talking about bringing something that was 10 across through a space that was really realistically 4 across, but we were cramming 5 through at a time, and we had to work on that. But we'd come out and we'd wait for the drummers to catch up and get into position. Then we'd break into a slow march. So we haven't even talked about that. Our band doesn't even do that. But slow marching is marching in half time with a very, like almost not a kick, but like a very glided step out. So we'd do that. We'd do a counter march. And then we moved in to form a plaid brooch. So we had pipers going every which direction, drummers going every which direction. And as a drum major, it was really cool because while we don't play when we're performing, there's a lot that we do to help guide and control the band on the march. Even when there's 11 drum majors in the formation, when we did the static formation, each drum major led their particular section of pipers or drummers out to form the brooch. So we had the drummers forming a saltire or a St. Andrew's cross, so a giant X in the center, and then the pipers went and countermarched to give us time to do that. And then when they came back, they came in and formed circles around the saltire. So it made a giant plaid brooch on the Esplanade of Edinburgh Castle. And one of the tunes in our medley that we played was called Pin the Knot of the Brooch. So it all kind of tied together. It was really cool. But unbelievable amount of work to make a show ready in what was realistically 3.5 days. I mean, we were all learning our music beforehand, months before. But when we got there, the teamwork that was required was just unbelievable. And, it was awe-inspiring to watch all of these things. And again, the pipe bands are just one part of a 90-minute show. Mm-hmm. So you had all kinds of acts coming together. But we would practice during the day at the barracks. We'd go home, we'd have a quick dinner, something to eat, something to drink, get whatever you needed done before we get on a bus again. And then we'd go over to the castle and we'd play and practice at Edinburgh Castle until I think it was the city of Edinburgh had a rule that like right at 11 p.m. like all the power got cut off. All sound had to stop, so we had to stop at 11. But there were some nights that we went till 10:59 p.m. Before we got done. But as I talk about it, I get the goosebumps again. It sounds corny, but it was so amazing. And the first time marching through the drawbridge of Edinburgh Castle, even at practice was one thing, but the first night there was an audience. And you're waiting behind the closed doors of the drawbridge, and you can hear the brass band down there doing their fanfare, and you can still hear the roar of 8,000 people in the audience. You know that they're there, but you can't see them. And then a production assistant yells "open," and the doors fly open. And just before they kick the doors open, they've had a fog machine going, and the fog is pumping in, and you can see it like pumping up, and you can see it like coasting underneath the doors of the drawbridge, and it's there. But they shout "open," the drum major shouts "by the center quick march," the drums roll off, the doors kick open, and you step forward, and it's like driving through thick fog. You can't see anything in front of you, so you just take that leap of faith and you step out and you hope that the ground is there. And it's so bizarre and so much fun. It was so much fun to take those first 8 paces or so as you're walking through the fog, through the drawbridge. And then as you come out of the fog, all you see is 8,000 people in the stands. And as soon as they see you, the camera flashes start going and you have to concentrate. I think if I were being totally honest and fair to myself, as I look back on it, I remember more than what I was actually thinking at the time. Especially those first couple of nights, I was just thinking, okay, you know exactly where you need to go. Each drum major had a specific spot that they chose to line up as their center point. I was very lucky. I was the second drum major in from the left. So the big exit that people were coming in and out of the castle from, you might remember when you went in June.
Yeah.
That whole side of the band had a large exit to go through. Well, that was section 8 of the seating. So there was a large sign with a number 8, and then there was like some audio equipment on top of that. Well, my marker was the audio equipment on the number 8. So I had it easy. I could just, get on, line up right on it, and I was good for the rest of the time. Except for the first time we did the Saturday show, the second show on Saturday night. We didn't have any sunlight. It was pitch black. I couldn't find my marker at all. And I just but by that point, you just kind of realize, you kind of know what it feels like at that point. You're going off of muscle memory at that point, but it's an amazing experience. And to know that 8,000 people every night saw you, do the math on it, you're looking at 250,000 people that you perform for in 4 weeks.
That's incredible.
There's too much to say on one episode. It really is.
Once again, if you want the whole story, let us know. We'll bring him back and we'll make him tell us every detail. So I know as much as you already knew going into that experience, you actually told us afterwards that you learned a lot. What did you learn from all of that? I mean, as a drum major, or just pipe band in general?
Yes, all those things. So all those things. And what I learned is that pipe bands are the same no matter where you go. It doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter what language you speak. It doesn't matter who you are, what you believe in. If you're in a pipe band, you're instant family, no matter where you go. And it was amazing to have that bond with somebody that may live 5,000, 10,000 miles away from you. And you're in a pipe band. It's like, oh, you're with so and such. Yeah, I'm with this band. Oh, I'm with that band. Oh, it's a pleasure to meet you. And then you find out that you know somebody who knows somebody, and we all become one family. And that bond was very important. But learning wise, I learned a lot about how just a monstrous production like that comes together. And I learned some tips and tricks about marching. I learned, and again, it wasn't something that they were actually just sitting down and instructing us on what to do. It was just the subtleties that if you kept your mouth shut and your eyes and ears open, especially for those first couple days, it was like going to school, and you could just pick up so much. Just little tips and tricks on how to get that many people through a short space in that amount of time. Musically, there were things that I picked up along the way. Learning about concert pitch on channers. The chanter pitch that we use is awfully high, and it's a lot different than like a tempered instrument, like let's say again, like using like trumpets, saxophones, and whatnot. We used to have pipes used to be tuned at A440 back in the day, which was concert A. There is no way that an A on a bagpipe is anywhere near concert A today. It used to be right about B flat, and now it's at concert B, and it's even rising closer than that, or closer ahead of concert B. But the channers that we use at the Tattoo were set and made differently to be a concert B flat chanter.
So speaking of learning things, not to call you out or anything, but you've been doing this a long time. Mm-hmm. And how do you keep yourself going? What inspires you to continue to learn, continue to do this after however many years?
After, how long has it been? It's almost 30 years now that I've been drum majoring. What keeps me going is the love of it. Really, I love pipe band. I love ceremonial music. Not just pipe bands. I love the brass bands, and that's both in British military fashion and in the U.S. military fashion. I like going to those types of shows. I like marching bands. So what keeps me going and how I stay current on things, I'm constantly looking for videos online. I'm constantly looking for YouTube clips of either the Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo, Trooping the Color, which is the Queen's birthday parade. guard mounts in London, constantly searching for videos of Highland regiments or Canadian regiments, looking to see how they do things. And over time, the drill has changed. Signals have certainly changed. Not so much the overall signal, but just some of the subtleties of how they move the mace to a certain position to give a certain signal, or maybe where the bass drum puts their cutoff. That really hasn't changed much, but there's some subtle tweaks to it. I'm constantly looking at that. My YouTube search history is an embarrassment of pipe band. I think it's fun when I turn on the Apple TV at home, and especially when my son's been watching it, because it's usually like a mix of like video game tutorials and tattoo. But those are things that I'm constantly looking at. Also, as an adjudicator for drum major competitions, I'm watching drum major competition videos from Highland Games in Scotland, in California, and just looking for anything that will help me see what's being done today, and not just looking at it to look at it, but why is it being done that way? Start to kind of analyze how it happens, and that helps me stay current as a drum major.
Nice.
So you were one of our first couple of supporters on Patreon, so thank you for that.
Yay.
Do you have any suggestions for future episodes?
I like the direction that you've been taking this podcast. Every episode, and I'm 1 or 2 episodes behind, but especially the first couple episodes, I was very impressed with the historical aspects, and some of the topics that have been discussed are things that you wouldn't normally hear in pipe band news. We are very competition driven, and it's important to celebrate people who are successful in competition, but that, especially at the upper grade levels, that is a very small population. And for folks that are starting out, it can almost be overwhelming, or maybe outside of their current understanding of what a pipe band is. So anything that can just sort of enlighten folks about the traditions, the histories of pipe band, or make it more fun to be in a pipe band, those are topics that I'd love to see. I think you're certainly on the right track.
Yay.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for your support, as always.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
And once again, if Kevin is a wealth of knowledge, and if you have anything you want to hear him talk more about, let us know. He has agreed to come back on if we have something that has any questions for him. Let us know what you think, what you thought of these episodes, what you think of the podcast in general, what you want to hear.
You can message us on Facebook or reach us at podbandpipecast@gmail.com.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening, everyone. If you enjoyed this show, then support us on Patreon for exclusive content, as well as the video of us recording this. We'll have special exercises we'll be writing, as well as tips and tricks with tenor drumming and other instruments to come. Subscribe to us on YouTube for some tenor tutorials and possibly other tutorials later on. And like us on Facebook at Podband Pipecast.